Thank you for joining us for this virtual reality, this webinar, and we're coming to you live from Sacramento, California. And, we're all experiencing a new season, and so CUFI is improvising and adapting, rising to the occasion to try to make sure that we can continue to bring you educational, informational content to keep you updated and informed. We could all be binge watching. A lot of us are binge watching, and there's a lot of things that are kind of junk food when it comes to the items on the menu. And if you would just go to CUFI.org and take a look at our virtual reality or virtual resources, you're going to see just a wealth, a gallery, an arsenal of things, literally hundreds of hours of really engaging, informative, educational, and entertaining content that you and your family are going to enjoy. Forward it to your friends. You'll be glad that you did. Today, we are going to be bringing to you what we've been bringing to live audiences in churches for several years. And over the last few months, we've refined it and honed it. Our communications team has put a razor sharp edge on this, where we're able to cover thousands of years in just a very short while. So as if this was in a church, which would run a little bit longer than a typical church service, this morning's webinar is going to probably weigh in a little bit more than an hour. We don't want to cut things off. We want to try to make sure it's comprehensive. If you're not able to stay with us for that entire time, then we will have it uploaded online, and you'll be able to revisit it and watch it when you do have more time, or if you want to watch it, in portions. And so, without further ado, let's just kind of lift this in prayer, and then we'll get on with the presentation. Lord Father, we are all in a time that's unfamiliar to us. We're navigating on unfamiliar terrain right now, but we know that you're in charge, and we just ask that you would just give our leaders wisdom, use this time as it appears that you already are, to just kind of scour away the divisiveness and remind everyone things that are way bigger than those petty things that we've allowed to divide us. We ask that even as we are separated and apart from one another, that we are reminded that we're not alone, and we're all experiencing, as we are being isolated and unable to really connect in person, that it's just given us a craving and an appetite to do that. And so you're using this time to really unify and knit us even tighter together. I believe that you're going to have this nation and all of us as individuals emerge out the other end of this better for it. We ask that you be with the families that are just suffering loss, and those that are just in the throes of combating this virus and the disease, and the financial hardships that it's been impacting on people, that somehow or another that you would right the ship, and that everyone would come out with circumstances where they can just stand on solid ground and be able to point to you that when this is all said and done and behind us, that you have been glorified in it, and that this nation would just be strengthened and drawn closer together through it. And I lift this in your precious name. Amen. And so, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and embark on the CUFI Why Israel presentation. So if you would, first of all, before we get out of the gate, a couple of disclaimers. If we were in a church, I would ask you to just remember, one, being pro-Israel is not synonymous with being anti-Arab. God loves all of his kids, and the worst enemies that the Arab people, the Palestinian people have ever had are their own leaders that have kept their boot on their throat for a long while to try to make them a festering wound for the sole purpose of demonizing and delegitimizing Israel in the eyes of the international community. And so that's very, very important that we realize that there's, anyone that has trouble reconciling that. A lot of folks, don't know how they can love one group and not the other. God loves all of his kids, and this organization seeks to find a way that the Palestinian people can have the human dignity, the rights, and the opportunities and quality of life that they deserve. And so we will do everything that we can to battle in it. And also, being pro-Israel and loving the Jewish people doesn't mean that you're compromising your Christian faith. Our Jewish friends know that we that we believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and we don't check it at the door. We don't make a secret or apology for it. But the caveat that really distinguishes our organization from so many others, other Christian groups that do noble, great work, is that we don't demand that our Jewish friends or brothers and sisters agree with us theologically before we're going to commit to stand with them unwaveringly. And then the third and last disclaimer is that this is a really biased presentation, and that if you don't think that Israel has the right to exist, you probably might want to just exit right now and reclaim what's left of your day, because by the end of this, you're going to realize that we believe that there's a very persuasive case, ironclad, carved in stone, that not only does Israel have the right to exist, she's got God's divine deed on her land and his plans and purposes to reveal and glorify himself to her and through her. So if you have not become familiar with CUFI, if maybe you got this link forwarded by a friend, and this is your first introduction, I'm going to show you a very short overview video that's going to give you a real quick up-to-date on a little bit of our history, bring you right up to speed. This video was only made just a few months ago and is encouraging and even inspiring as it is to see that we're 7 million members strong. In just a few months since it was made, we're actually well over 8 million members strong. So pay particular attention in this clip to our DC Summit and CUFI on campus, because we're going to circle back to that a little bit later.
Hello, I'm Pastor John Hagee, the chairman of Christians United for Israel. Along with 400 of America's top Christian leaders, I founded CUFI in 2006. With more than 7 million members, we've grown to become the largest pro-Israel organization in the United States. CUFI is the foremost Christian organization educating and empowering millions of Americans to speak and act with one voice in defense of Israel and the Jewish people. CUFI's diversity across political, ethnic, generational, and denominational lines maximizes our impact in communities, the media, on campus, and in our nation's capital. At CUFI, we are a unified voice speaking truth to elected officials, making sure that the evil of anti-Semitism and the darkness of hatred that spawns war, terror, and persecution of the Jewish people are defeated by the unity of God's people. Our goal is to protect Israel against lies, boycotts, bad theology, and political threats. In 2008, we started CUFI on campus to combat the rising tide of anti-Semitism at America's universities. CUFI on campus is preparing a new generation to bless and defend Israel on campus and beyond, empowering young Christian students to know the truth about Israel and to stand up for their Jewish friends. Our Israel Collective initiative provides millennial Christian leaders with opportunities to connect with the land, history, and people of Israel. The Israel Collective is changing the way millions of young adults see the Jewish state. At the start of 2016, we launched The Watchman on TBN, hosted by Eric Stackelbeck. The Watchman spotlights the rising security threats facing America and Israel, showcases the miraculous stories of how Israel is a light unto the nations, and highlights the work CUFI does to make Israel stronger and her people safer every day. The Watchman has become one of TBN's most popular Friday night primetime shows, and was recently brought to the airwaves on Fox Business Network as well. We have taken thousands of pastors, millennial influencers, and college high school students to Israel and brought them back with a blazing passion that transforms their love of Israel into active support. Every person we've taken to Israel represents thousands more who are influenced by these leaders. Our diversity outreach team is growing CUFI's support in a wide range of communities across the United States. Love for Israel unites believers of every background and culture. Every summer, Christians United for Israel gathers in our nation's capital for the annual Washington, D.C. Summit. Thousands of passionate pro-Israel Christians unite to celebrate our love for the God of Israel and his people in the land. The Washington Summit attracts the top speakers and Middle East experts in the field, as well as influential leaders from Jerusalem and Washington. With the help of every pro-Israel Christian, we can safeguard Israel's future. Join Christians United for Israel, and we'll teach you how to take your place as a watchman on the walls of Jerusalem. The movement is over 7 million voices strong. Add yours today.
Well, you know what? As Christians, we believe that there's a biblical mandate for Christians to support Israel, and a lot of scholars are growing further and further away from what's regarded as a replacement theology or supersession theology, and some of them are even being bold enough to even challenge the leaders in their own denominations that would subscribe to that doctrine, and saying that, you know what, you have to be taught to not see the biblical mandate to stand with Israel. You have got to be taught to not see that God has not broken his covenants and he's not done with Israel and the Jewish people. If you are literate, if you just are able to read and you don't use a commentary, you just look at the Word of God and you read it from the first book to the last, you'll come out the other end realizing that your faith rests in a God that's in the business of keeping his promises. He's a covenant-keeping God. And we're going to just scratch the surface on that. But I want to just encourage you that in this challenging, troubling, tumultuous time that we're in right now, that there are folks that you know in your circle of friends and family that they don't get a dial tone when they go to pray. They are petrified of the unknown, and that if you would just encourage them to reread their Bible, and have them just keep an eye out in their peripheral vision for what the Word of God says about Israel, they're going to be reminded that their faith rests in a God that's in the business of keeping his promises. And it all begins, this biblical covenant all begins with the Abrahamic covenant. Take a look in Genesis, and the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had parted from him, look around from where you are, north and south, east and west, all the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring. And everybody said together, forever. So when the Lord in whom your faith rests uses the word forever, how long do you think he means? Abraham says, so Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession of it? We leap ahead to Genesis 15, and he says that I will establish a covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you, the generations to come. He goes back, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. Again, our faith rests in God. When he uses words like forever, and when he uses words like everlasting, we've got to be reminded that he means what he says. You know, Abraham questions him. He was not sure. He says, and God responds to him, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant. And then God says, when God made his promise to Abraham, we see this in Hebrews, when God made his promise to Abraham, since there was no one greater for him to swear by, he swore by himself. If you take a look at Hebrews and you go into Hebrews 6, you're going to see that the case is being made that this passage, this Abrahamic covenant, is the anchor of which our faith rests. You know, Hebrew describes that this isn't, that God has made an immutable promise, an immutable covenant. He is not, it is impossible for him to lie. It's not possible for him to make a statement, to make a covenant, and then go back on it. There's a scholar that subscribes to a very anti-Israel camp. He's got a lot of letters behind his name that makes it look very impressive if you're a scholar. And he would say that an unrevocable covenant that is amended becomes a revocable covenant. Well, that may be true if you're dealing with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, but not if you're dealing with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. John 44:22, you Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Take a look at Romans 11. And Romans 11 it's almost like an addendum that's dropped right into Romans 9, 10, and 11. Did God reject his people? By no means. I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. God did not reject his people, whom he foreknew. Don't you know what Scripture says in the passing about Elijah, how he appealed to God against Israel? The disciples tried to pin Paul into a corner asking about the salvation of the Jews. And Paul, who's a bit above my pay grade, I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably yours too. If he's asked to explain these things, he resigns it to the mysteries of God. And if Paul resigns it to the mysteries of God, I think I will too. Romans 11:17. This is a warning that the early church did not heed. If some of the branches have been broken off and you, though a wild olive shoot, have been grafted in among the others and now share in the nourishing sap from the olive root, do not consider yourself to be superior of those other branches. If you do consider this, you do not support the root, but the root supports you. That's a warning that the early church did not heed. And we've got about 1900 years under the banner of Christendom, under the banner of the church, to the Jewish people that have chapter after chapter after chapter that are extremely unchristlike. And if the early church had just simply heeded this warning from Paul, we'd have a whole different history and a whole different relationship with the Jewish community. Romans 15:27, they were pleased to do it, and indeed they owe it to them. For if the Gentiles have shared in the Jews' spiritual blessings, they owe it to the Jews to share with them in their material blessings. This is the early church. This is the Gentiles being brought in. And are they giving the material blessings because they're drawing from Genesis 12:3, that they know that if they bless the Jews that they'll be blessed? Or are they really just looking at the words of Jesus himself? Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, other passages say, my brethren, you did for me. When Jesus spoke these words, the gospel, the good news hadn't been brought to the Gentiles. He was speaking about his brethren, about his fellow Jewish people. Ezekiel 36. And the desolate land will be cultivated instead of laying desolate in the sight of all who pass through it. They will say, this land that has laid waste has become like the Garden of Eden. The cities were lying in ruins, desolate and destroyed, are now fortified and inhabited. You know, when we bring pastors to Israel, before we go, we try to just get them dialed in. Every one of them, virtually every single one of them, has a set of lenses on when they're about to embark for the Holy Land, where they want to go to those steps and the southern steps going up to the temple, and they want to walk at them because they know that some of those are the very steps that Paul and Jesus had to tread on to go up to the temple. And that's where they want to go. And that's fantastic. And it's faith-kindling to go there and stand there and to just marvel that, that you're in that same place. But it's important for us to realize, that God is doing things today as well. And we've got to pay very close attention because within our lifetime, within this generation, within the last century, he's fulfilling miracles. And it's important for us to appreciate the fact that God doesn't just, keep his promises. We're all expected to do that. God made promises that demand miracles to be kept. We take a look at the Esdraelon Valley in the early 1920s. This is a teaching moment, and this is why this is going to run a little bit over an hour. It's impossible back then for Jewish immigrants to purchase land. The Arabs would be ostracized at best if they got caught selling land to Jews. And so the only way that Jews would be on a land, every square inch of then Palestine back in the 20s was either inherited through the family because the Jewish family had been there for centuries. We've got friends whose family tree goes back hundreds and hundreds of years there in Israel. But immigrants that were coming in, the only land that they could acquire would be, if it was sold by Arabs or absentee landowners, was that was deemed worthless. And that was either sand that you could barely grow even kale in, or in many cases, neglected valleys that had become swamps. Then they were infested with malaria. But if you give, Jewish immigrants malaria-infested swamps and you equip them with Western agriculture technology, this is not the Esdraelon Valley that you're going to see if you visit Israel today. This is the Esdraelon Valley that you're going to see. It's gone from Death Valley to a breadbasket. The Hula Valley is the same way. These people are wearing masks and nets because they're actually literally risking their lives for the sake of their kids and grandkids to inherit a better property. But this isn't the Hula Valley that you're going to see today. This is the Hula Valley that you're going to see today. If you go back, there's a great book by Samuel Clemens, AKA Mark Twain. And he tread just a little bit before this picture was taken. He went through the land writing dispatches for a couple of papers in California. This is a beachfront property, and there's a great story about how Tel Aviv was purchased just a bunch of sand dunes by its, not very far away is the ancient Arab town of, Jewish town of Jaffa. And now at this point it was an Arab town. But Mark Twain in the book Innocents Abroad, he chronicles that as he went through the whole land of Palestine, that he was barely able to see a jackal, hardly ever saw, could go days and never see another person. And that's a passage that it actually speaks to that in Isaiah 43. He's making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland, wild animals, the jackals and the owls, because I provide water in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland to give drink to my people. And he is doing a new thing. What you just saw was what was going to become Tel Aviv. But if you go to Israel today, this is what you're going to see as Tel Aviv. He has done a new thing, and it's amazing. Genesis 12:3 is that cornerstone passage that, every book, every DVD, every conference that you go to, if you love Israel, is going to at some point cite Genesis 12:3. And if you take a look at Pastor Hagee's teachings, and if you go to Christian Zionist for Israel Facebook page, you can pull up a recent video of Pastor Hagee's teachings on the biblical mandate. And I've heard him teach scores of times, and I've never seen him do better than he just did a few days ago. And it's available to you on Facebook, on our Facebook page, Christian Zionist for Israel, CUFI in parentheses. Scroll down to the videos to Pastor Hagee's teaching, which was last Monday. And he drills deep and covers a lot of ground, and he unpacks. In Genesis 12:3, if you take a look at Luke 7 and Acts 10, you'll see the very promises manifested, chronicled that are made here in Genesis 12:3. I will bless you. How is there's millions of Christians across this country and around the world that believe the incredible station that this nation enjoys, the quality of life, the opportunities that we have are in no small way related to the fact that we were the first nation to recognize the reestablishment of the Jewish homeland. And, take a look at, whoever curses you, I will curse. Take a look at not just nations, but vast empires that chose to deal harshly with the Jewish people. And if they even still exist today, they are a rag or a shell or a shadow of what they once were. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. How is it possible that a people group that doesn't even make up barely a quarter of the percent of the world population, barely even 0.25 of 1% of the world population, but they're at the cutting edge when it comes to Nobel Prizes and developing technology that has to do with enhancing the quality of life, increasing the days of life. We're coming up on Easter and Passover, and during Passover, there's a prayer that's always lifted up, and it paraphrases the realities, the harsh realities that the Jewish people have always had to endure. And it is this covenant that has stood for our forefathers and us. For not just one enemy has stood against us to wipe us out, but in every generation, there have been those who have stood against us to wipe us out. And the Holy One, blessed be He, saves us from their hands. Of course, this, we see this beginning in the Exodus. That there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply. Of course, we're talking about Ramses, and we're talking about the Exodus. Abraham is the father of our faith, but Moses, you take a look at the Torah, they're the books of Moses. The 4 of the 5 books are about Moses. He was the anvil in which the Jewish people and what they would become was forged and founded. And this is the man that really took, God had used the Jewish people to bless Egypt and make it expand and survive one of the harshest seasons the world had ever known. And just through his own distrust, he decided to turn against it, and in turn brought God against Egypt. You see the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians. It's important for us to realize that, Babylon, they did not seek to destroy Jerusalem. They just seek to harvest the elite. They wanted it for themselves to enhance their own society. And so, they'd gone in and they brought about 10,000 of Jerusalem's very finest, the most learned, the scholars. And mathematicians and physicians, and they brought them to Babylon so that they could glean and benefit from them. And it wasn't until, the leaders that they left in charge in Jerusalem decided that they were going to have it their own way, that the Babylonians went in and destroyed the first temple. But if you take a look at just the diaspora, if you take a look at what the Lord did in Babylon by that first group that he brought a decade earlier, they were allowed to totally practice their faith and their society and their traditions and their culture. And so when these exiles left Jerusalem, they found themselves in Babylon, they arrived finding a perfect Jewish society and culture, so that it was like a Tupperware container to preserve their faith and their traditions and their culture. The Lord had made a way. The Lord knew what was forthcoming, and he made provision to preserve it. And when we take a look at the book of Esther, God isn't even mentioned in the book of Esther, but we see some profound faith. We also see a couple of things. We see the very first introduction of genocide. Now, Ramses wanted to annihilate the Jewish people, but he was going to do that through assimilation by eliminating all the male Jews, all the male Hebrews, so that the Jewish women wouldn't be able to marry a Jewish husband. Take a look and get that a little deeper in Pastor Hagee's teaching on Facebook. But we also see through Haman, the desire for annihilation, for a genocide. And then we see through Mordecai, the amazing impact, the way that you can turn a nation and the leaders of it by appealing to them and the Lord touching their heart. And we're going to see how the Lord used Mordecai. Esther gets all the credit, but it could be lovingly called the book of Mordecai as well, because Mordecai is the one that actually intervened. And we're gonna wrap this presentation by taking a look at exactly the impact that he made. Take a look at the destruction of the second temple. This is extremely important. A lot of people dismiss this. They roll their eyes like, of course we know that's a chapter in history. Well, there's folks at the UN that aren't so sure, because in October of 2016, they did a blind ballot vote a couple of times saying that the very Temple Mount that you're looking at in this image has no Jewish historical connection. Go to Rome, take a look at the Arch of Titus. If you see that menorah that's there in the lower left-hand area, that thing is carved on a 35-foot slab of marble as a trophy for Rome for conquering the temple. We fast forward to the era of the Crusades. A lot of Christians don't realize, and now we're delving in to chapters in Christian history where we did not heed that warning that Paul gave us in Romans 11. The Crusaders, under the auspices of liberating the holy city of Jerusalem from Islam, what did they do when they rode in? They herded all the Jews into the temple. They wrapped some chains around the doorknobs, and they lit it on fire while they sang, "Christ, we adore thee." One of the most unchristlike chapters in the history of Christendom. The Inquisition, 1492. You all learned that when you were in grade school. But Columbus had a little trouble getting out of the port because the ships were so thick from Jews being exiled that he had to actually delay his exit point. Most folks, at this point, most folks think that we are slinging mud on the bride's gown when we cast aspersions against one of the founding fathers. But the reality is, and some scholars, speculate if it maybe was the onslaught of senility or dementia, but Martin Luther, who had his epiphany and revelation about grace over works, he did a turn. He thought he'd cracked a code that was going to open the floodgates for the Jewish people to embrace the Christian faith. And when they decided to stay with their own, he was the one that drew a stiff neck and a hard heart. And he wrote some of the most vitriolic, anti-Semitic things that have ever been put to paper by a pen. Some of Hitler's most rallying, energizing, speeches to his throngs of thugs were just simply quoting Martin Luther verbatim. There's folks that are watching this presentation or video right now, and they've never even heard the word pogrom. They think it's a typo. They don't even know what a pogrom is. A pogrom is an organized, institutionalized calculated method of trying to expel a people group from a community. Doesn't necessarily mean ethnic cleansing or violence, but just to make it absolutely unbearable. Unfortunately, in Russia and Eastern Europe, the pogroms were way more than unbearable. They were violent to the pain of death. And, it's written that the eyes are the lamps of the heart. And we've all seen images in a movie. We looked at the rating of the movie and we think it's going to be okay. And all of a sudden there's a graphic image that goes across the screen that we wish that we hadn't seen. You wish that you could unsee it. You wish you could erase it from your hard drive. And if you read just the text, the recordings, the accounts of what happened, what allegedly Christian people did to the Jewish people during the pogroms, you will wish that you had not read the text. It is that horrific. I'm not even going to come close to even hinting at it because it's absolutely abhorrent. And then we get to this chapter. Elie Wiesel was an iconic figure. He was a Holocaust survivor, and he dedicated the rest of his life to making sure that there would not be another Holocaust. And if you take all of his writings and his lectures, if you asked him to distill it down to just a few statements, he would try to get people to appreciate the fact that the Holocaust happened. Anti-Semitism was fueled by indifference. Right now we're dealing with a disease. Anti-Semitism is a disease. And there are parallels that are very similar. And, as dangerous as it is to be around someone that has the symptoms openly, visibly, the people that, the individuals that are the most dangerous are the ones that don't care about the practices. They ignore the protocols, and they don't care if they are a carrier of the disease. They're indifferent to it. They may have it, but because it's not affecting them, they don't give a second thought to transferring it to other people around them. And that's exactly what indifference can do when it comes to anti-Semitism or other forms of bigotry. It's when are you reluctant to speak up when a remark is made? When do you think that you have to smile at an inappropriate joke just so that you don't feel the odd man out? It's our calling to not be indifferent, and we're going to visit that a little bit more. We'll take a look at one of CUFI's greatest friends, greatest champions. If you've been to with CUFI for any length of time, then you're familiar with our friend and champion Irving Roth, and we're going to visit that in a few minutes and really take a look at it. But as the Holocaust really just the world was shaken and brought to sobriety, and the Lord actually brought the nations together and used the United Nations as a midwife to recognize. The world actually recognized that the Jewish people, they needed a sovereign state, and the most appropriate place for it would be in their ancient biblical homeland.
After 30 years of promises from the British and other world leaders, in 1947, the Jewish people finally received formal approval from the United Nations General Assembly for the recreation of an independent Jewish state in the land of Israel. According to the UN's partition plan, the Jews would receive a tiny fraction of the land originally set aside for them by previous agreements. UN Resolution 181 passed on November 29, 1947. Desperate Jewish leaders accepted the offer of these disjointed scraps of land, but Arab leaders said no and vowed to wipe the nascent Jewish state from the face of the earth.
Now, you have probably read Isaiah 66 more times than you can recall, but if you take a look at it, it's kind of a mirror reflection. You don't give birth before you go into labor, but that's exactly what the passage forecasts, and that's exactly what happened. On May 14th of 1948, Israel declared her independence, and then, immediately she was cast into war. A nation was born in a day, and immediately she went into labor. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time and reclaim the surviving remnant of his people from Assyria, from Lower Egypt, from Upper Egypt, from Cush, from Elam, from Babylonia, from Hamath, from the islands of the Mediterranean when Israel declared her independence.
After nearly 2,000 years of exile and foreign domination, the Jewish people once again were free in their own land. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion proclaimed Israel's official independence and modern rebirth. Celebration was short-lived. The next day, 5 Arab armies attacked Israel. Short on manpower, resources, and with almost no international assistance, Israel miraculously survived and even gained ground. But independence came at a great cost. Israel lost 6,373 people in the war, nearly 1% of its entire population. After more than a year of fighting, the Arab nations made armistice agreements with Israel and withdrew. For the first time in 2 millennia, the Jewish people had a national home and a strong defense force.
This tiny nation, this infant nation, barely the size of New Jersey, she emerges from war, and she's still performing triage on herself. And what does? She reaches out to bring her sisters and brothers home from all the 4 corners of the earth. I'll bring my people of Israel back from exile. They will rebuild their ruined cities and live in them again. They'll plant vineyards, drink their wine, make gardens, and eat their fruit. I'll plant Israel in their own land, never again. When the Lord says never again, how long do you think he means? To be uprooted from the land I've given them, says the Lord your God. Millions have come back. This is just one example of where Alaska Airlines was actually, contracted to do the emergency airlift to bring 50,000 Yemenite Jews out of Yemen. Great Britain was barely holding back the rioting mobs, and Israel didn't have the military hardware to do it themselves, the air hardware, so she contracted it out and brought back hundreds of thousands, nearly 1 million refugees from the Middle East and North Africa, while she's just trying to build a nation, pulling herself up from her bootstraps. And while she's doing this, while she's just trying to get these people together, trying to get them out of tents, they're not refugees, they're assimilating in to become citizens. No compensation from the countries that had just kicked them out or that they were just rescued from. And while Israel is intensely focused on still trying to do this, barely 19 years later, what happens? Her Arab neighbors decide once again they want to cast every last Jew into the sea in 1967.
In May 1967, 5 Arab armies began gathering on Israel's borders. Egyptian President Nasser and the governments of Syria, Iraq, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia publicly declared their intention to wipe Israel off the map. The United Nations and every ally Israel turned to refused to intervene. Faced with utter annihilation and an Egyptian blockade off of a vital Israeli port, the Jewish state decided to strike first. On June 5th, the Israeli Air Force destroyed Egypt's planes while they sat on the ground. 2 days later, the IDF won the battle for Jerusalem. By June 10th, Israel had defeated the invaders and won control of huge new territories. Most of the land was returned in exchange for peace treaties, but Israel declared that Jerusalem would never be divided again.
Now, there's a couple of chapters, there's a couple of points here that are really, really critical for us to understand. And it has to do with journalists and professors in universities. They would have our sons and daughters, have the notion that Israel is a land-stealing, territory-expanding occupier. So let's do a couple of bookends. We're going to go back in time 19 years, back to 1948. When Israel declared her independence, when Ben-Gurion from his office looked down at the plaza and he saw this huge hora dance, the arm in arm, one circle going one way and a circle around it going the other and a circle around it going the other. And in his journal, he writes that that he knew that he could not celebrate with them because they were about to go to war. And go to war they did. On May 14th of 1948, when Ben-Gurion declared her independence, there were 1,600 Jews living in the Jewish quarter of Jerusalem. The Jordan steamrolled right over the partition plans that the United Nations had drawn on a map. And by May 28th, there was not one Jew. Though those people and their predecessors, their family. They had been there for well over 1,000 years. Some say well over 1,500 years. But on May 28th, there wasn't one. So let's fast forward to June 1967, barely 19 years later. Not even a week, in 6 days, the Arab armies apparently had overestimated their military prowess, because Israel has quadrupled her territory. There's a couple of points from that video that's very important for us to make note of, and that is that it mentioned that Israel did a preemptive strike on Egypt. Egypt had been broadcasting radio programming into Israel for days, day in and day out. Israel had been listening to threats and boasts that her streets were going to run with blood, that if anyone did survive, they'd be cast into the sea. Israel took this threat so seriously. She was so positive that her casualties were going to be in the thousands, that she had rabbis actually consecrate her parks to become mass cemeteries. And she was accruing thousands of body bags in anticipation of what was going to happen. That's why she did the preemptive strike. It's really, she quadruples her landmass. Before we get to the negotiations about the land, one of the key things that she did immediately was reunify her holy eternal capital of Jerusalem. When she does this, she seals off the city. She goes around the corridor. And what do you know? She just inherited 70,000 Arabs. Did she eject them or imprison them or execute them like Jordan did to the 1600 back in 1948? No, she asked every one of them to please become full citizens of the new state of Israel, or of the state of Israel, pardon me. And about 10%, about 7,000 of them took her up on that invitation. The other 90% were petrified of Yasser Arafat of the PLO and his henchmen, positive that if they became citizens, they'd be hurled off of a tall building the next day. But for that 10%, Israel had to kind of scratch its head and come up with a hybrid classification. So they're not a full-blown citizen, but they're a permanent resident. Have voting rights, they can own property, they have a blue jacket on their ID card, they can pass, through checkpoints. But the reality is that Israel had, as we just saw a second ago, quadrupled her territory. And she gets back to bear with me. She gets back to the Arab League, and she reaches out. She says, "Look, we want to give back the Golan and Gaza and or Sinai, and just agree to live with us in peace, negotiate with us so that we could be good neighbors, recognize that we have the right to exist." And this is the olive branch that Israel extends to the Arab League, and they mull it over. And this is extremely important for us to consider, because this is a chapter in history that our college professors seem to have trouble finding.
After winning the Six-Day War, Israel controlled several territories captured from the invading Arab nations. Israel's new borders included the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the huge Sinai Peninsula, and the strategic Golan Heights. Israel offered to return the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt and the Golan Heights to Syria on June 19, 1967. In exchange, Israel wanted peace agreements. The immediate answer was no. At the Arab League's Khartoum conference in Sudan, the League adopted an official position against Israel that included 3 infamous no's. No peace, no recognition, no negotiation. For 12 years, the 3 no's prevented all peace efforts. To this day, the 3 no's are a major obstacle to establishing peace between Israel and many of its neighbors.
It's really important for us to appreciate, it's going to take an act of God, more than likely, to bring peace to the Middle East. Understanding the solution of the conflict is way above my pay grade, but understanding the root of the conflict is extremely elementary. There's not a Palestinian state because the Arabs have rejected it. The reason, the root of the conflict is not the absence of a Palestinian state. It's refusal to recognize the Jewish state. And so from 48 to 67, Israel just was in a constant turmoil. This is a very deceiving slide because it looks like Israel has had a number of wars. The reality is that Israel's been in one continuous war since 1947. This just happens to be kind of a list of her responses or attempts to dial it down from 1967 until the present. And, you know, as encouraging as it was to take a look at those passages in Ezekiel about the desert, you know, blooming like the Garden of Eden and the desolate cities being inhabited again, there's other predicted prophecies that are ominous, but they are just as true. Oh God, do not remain silent. Do not turn a deaf ear. Do not stand aloof, oh God. See how your enemies growl, how your foes rear their heads with cunning. They conspire against your people. They plot against those you cherish. Some passages or versions say they form a confederacy. Come, they say, let us destroy them as a nation so that Israel's name would be remembered no more. Does that kind of sound familiar? Have you heard world leaders say something that resembles, come, let us destroy them as a nation so that Israel's name is remembered no more? Of course we have. You know, we take a look at Hamas. Just Google Hamas's charter and you'll see right in the first sentence exactly what she intends to do. Israel will exist until Islam obliterates it. The Palestinian Authority is the successor of the PLO. It's, you know, it's important to take a note. PLO was really launched in 1964. So let's just open up and unpack the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Imagine the word liberation in bold italics. In 1964, there were no Jews in Gaza. There were no Jews, as you see in that red map right there, in Judea and Samaria, aka the West Bank, Israel's biblical heartland. So what was the Palestinian Authority or Palestinian Liberation Organization going to liberate from who in 1964? Because there weren't any Jews in what was considered the occupied territories of Gaza and Judea and Samaria. And the answer is that they were going to liberate Israel proper from the Israelis. Hezbollah, a proxy agent of Iran, of the two armies in Lebanon, Hezbollah is absolutely, unquestionably, the better trained, better armed, more formidable. And we have the Islamic Republic of Iran, world's largest state-sponsored terror. It's important for us to note, if you don't know everything about CUFI, one of the most, you know, curious things that I would say, I've been with it from nearly day one. I can tell you that the founding of this organization was founded when the president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, said the words, "Imagine a world without Zionism in America." And it was those words and that threat that was part of the catalyst that prompted Pastor Hagee to take the steps to go ahead and found and organize this organization.
It all began with words. 1.1 million Jews, 10% of the Jewish population of all of Europe was brought here in that period of time and murdered. Based on propaganda and lies, things which have absolutely nothing to do with reality. In Germany, it began with words at the bottom of a newspaper. The Jews are our misfortune. It began in the 1920s, the first anti-Jewish law. That law says that do not buy anything from a Jew. Do not use any Jewish products. The first step is boycott. I call those signposts along the road to Auschwitz. The signs were there, big and bold. Nobody bothered to look at it. That is why, when 10 years ago, the concept of a boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel came along, I screamed and yelled at the top of my voice. There's one thing we need to learn from the Holocaust. We must recognize those signposts along the road to Auschwitz.
It's important for us to realize that Adolf Hitler never did anything to the Jewish people that he didn't say well ahead of time he was going to do. When Irv was standing in front of that car on the tracks in Auschwitz, that video didn't capture, that he addressed those 70 plus people, and he explained, he distilled it all down to them, that everything leading up to and through the Holocaust, that in every occasion, that there were only ever four groups of people, four kinds of people. That there were the victims, as he was, there were the perpetrators, there were the bystanders, and there were the interveners. We've seen a rise and skyrocket of anti-Semitism and hate crimes against the Jewish people. And anti-Semitism is just a sanitized word for Jewish hatred, hatred of the Jewish people. But we have seen it just absolutely spiraling out of control, to the degree that you could see the flowers at the memorial of one synagogue shooting barely wilted before the next one occurs. One of the vehicles that's been used to really kind of bring it into the center, into tolerated mainstream society, has been the Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions Act, the BDS movement. And this seeks to try to hijack what happened in South Africa and liken it to Israel, which is an abominable insult to the Black South Africans that had to actually endure apartheid in South Africa. The reality is that the BDS movement is nothing more than just a vitriolic anti-Semitic vehicle that is a fig leaf, that is, its main destination, its goal is the destruction, the dismantling of the Jewish state. It's anti-Semitism with a veil over it.
Today, we are seeing the rise of an old enemy wearing a new mask. Once, anti-Semitism was displayed by those in white hoods wearing the twisted cross of the swastika. But today, this old hatred hides in plain sight. Only a decade ago, anti-Semites were shunned and despised. Now, this appalling bigotry has a platform on Twitter and is applauded in the public square. Anti-Semites rail against Israel on our college campuses. They break bread with elected officials. They commit acts of heinous violence in our cities. They may not wear the uniforms of their forefathers, but today's anti-Semites are more dangerous than ever. Today, anti-Semites wrap themselves in the flags of faith, social justice, and liberty. They contort the very concepts Americans hold so dear. So let us not be blind to the anti-Semitism that hides in plain sight. Words like anti-Zionism serve as fig leaves for bigotry. For decades, support for Israel transcended party, ideology, and faith in this country. But today, the loss of objective truth and the acceptance of moral ambiguity have enabled anti-Semitic movements to spread like cancer. CUFI was built for such a time as this. We will not let this darkness dim our light, for Christians are a light unto the world, and Israel is a light unto the nations. So shine bright, shine the light on anti-Semitism that hides in plain sight, from churches to college campuses, from state capitals to Congress. We at Christians United for Israel seek to be a light in the darkness. As light conquers darkness, so shall we conquer this anti-Semitic scourge. Join us. Don't curse the darkness. Shine the light.
And Israel does seek to be a light to the nations. The Jewish people do. The Jewish people have a mandate. It's in their DNA to leave the world a better place than they inherited it, to leave a world a better place for their kids, to repair it, to heal the world. Haiti in 2010, the first field hospital on the ground to open up was from Israel. Here they are in a vice, in a crucible of her neighbors that are trying to destroy her, and still she makes a priority to help anybody in need around the world. She's a first responder on a global level. First field hospital in Haiti, the only one that didn't close its doors within 24 hours. My folks had retirement property in Paradise, California, and barely 2 days after the fire that swept through, the campfire that made it look like a nuclear warhead had gone off in this tiny little town in central California, Israel had water generators, deployed so that there could be safe, potable drinking water for not only the first responders, but the victims that were going through. You take a look at Operation Good Neighbor. You probably never even heard of this campaign because Israel kept it a secret. They're not. My worst criticism of the state of Israel is that they're their own worst enemies when it comes to public relations, because they don't invest the time to explain why they're doing something or what they have to do, because they never would allow themselves to be cast as a victim. Here they go in and they save thousands of Syrians. They risk their lives with commandos going in the dead of night to extract them from hostile territory, to bring them to hospitals for life-saving care. And when they bring them back, think of the passages in your Greek scriptures, your New Testament, where all the times that Jesus would heal somebody. And what would he say when he sent them on their way? Don't tell anybody that I did this for you. And that's exactly what the Syrians would, or what Israel would do when they would bring these healed people that were raised and educated to hate Jews and to think that they were their archenemy. They would be healed. Their minds were confounded to find this love and compassion from somebody that they thought was against them. And the Israelis would bring them back. Their prescriptions would be in Arabic as to not draw suspicion. And when the last thing they would say before they would leave them back in Syria was, don't tell anybody that we did this for you. They don't want them to face the brunt of being accused as collaborators. It's one of the most diverse nations that you would ever consider. If you ever have the opportunity, you must go and you will see an incredible spectrum of diversity. And you take a look at the incredible contributions of that passage in Genesis 12:3, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. We see in the lower right-hand corner, the Israeli bandage, Gabriel Giffords, the congresswoman in Tucson, Arizona. Her life, when she was shot during that campaign rally, her life being saved was credited to the bandage that you see right there. And the paramedic, out of his own pocket, made sure that it was in his bag. Drip irrigation technology. And right now, as we face the challenges of this virus, this presentation may be up for years to come, but we're talking about this in 2020 and April 1st. And we're in the throes of a mandatory national stay-in and millions of doses of the malaria cure or the malaria medication that looks like it's actually very effective against this virus. Israel has contributed, and Israel's on the cutting edge and the forerunner when it comes to not just developing a vaccine, but an actual cure for it as well. Take a look at our resources, Nehemiah. If you take a look at the passages in Nehemiah, you will see exactly the embodiment of CUFI. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. If you don't already pray for Israel and the Jewish people, it's time to start. And if you do, it's time to take it up a notch. And it's time to also, get up from our knees and tangibly act within our circle of influence. And that includes our elected officials. We're very glad that you're able to join us this morning. We're about ready to wind up. I ask you to, we don't know what the future holds, but every year we converge in Capitol Hill. Thousands of CUFI members and leaders will gather in Washington, D.C. to just remind our elected officials that it's not just their Jewish constituents that care about strong U.S.-Israel relations. When this organization was founded in 2006, anti-Semitism was barely in our peripheral vision, and really the main focus was just trying to do whatever we could do strategically and diplomatically to try to prevent Iran from getting their hands on nuclear weapons. It's almost like a 180 has happened. We've just about exhausted the avenues as far as containing Iran, and in the meantime, anti-Semitism has just exploded. And so right now we just are proud to be able to point to the fact that the Lord used us in a catalytic way to see the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act actually get passed as a executive order, and we're working on the Never Again Holocaust Education Act right now. And so we're not sure exactly what the summer is going to look like, but we are definitely going to bring our weight and influence our elected officials one way or the other. And we encourage and ask you to go to CUFI.org so that you can to join us and add your voice to ours, so that we together we can have even a greater impact on this legislation and others that are going to be forthcoming. One of the most important things that we do, if we don't pass the baton to our Joshua generation, then really we have to question what it is that we're doing, and what is the legacy that we're leaving. And so one of the most important things that CUFI has is our campus division, chapters on universities across hundreds of campuses in the country. And there are sponsorships that are available not only to go to Washington, D.C., but for those that really demonstrate leadership and take action and make an impact on their campus. There's resources and they will be invested in. They'll be brought to San Antonio for our student activism and leadership training. And they will become ninjas when it comes to advocacy, where they'll be able to take that Judeo-Christian moral compass that's been instilled in them in their home churches, and they'll use it to be able to impact the political process and the elected officials in their local community and the nation as well. We took a look at Esther and Mordecai earlier, and Haman, didn't like the fact that Mordecai wouldn't bend his knee to him, and he basically waged a charge that is a blood libel, and it's one of the root charges of anti-Semitism even to this very day. There have been people in recent months that have echoed this charge of dual loyalty, that because Mordecai wouldn't bend his knee, that he wasn't faithful to the king. And that charge of dual loyalty is something that is still cast in charge with the Jewish people to this day. But what we see in Mordecai is that even though Esther was able to shine light on the underbelly of Haman's intentions, Mordecai realized that the edict that Haman persuaded the king to write was still on the books. And so he actually took the courage to appeal to the king to rewrite the law. And he changed it from where, the provinces to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the Jews. And he changed it to give them the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their families. And so that is a crystallization of exactly the importance of your single voice and your single vote, how we can actually change the course of this country and change the way that our laws are impacted. Because, the nation of Israel that we see today was a dream. It was a vision of, one of the fathers of modern Zionism, Theodor Herzl. And, when Theodor Herzl assembled a Congress of Jews to cast the vision of this would-be nation, and he actually, without knowing, I'm sure, prophetically spoke. He said, I don't know, maybe not for 50 years. And he said that in 1898. And it wasn't to the day, but it was 50 years later in 1848 when his vision actually came to fruition. And the history is fraught with not just Jewish Zionists, but Christian leaders as well. When Herzl was on his deathbed, he cited priest William Heckler, and people just kept asking Theodor Herzl, what kept you going? Why did you were up against the world and it wasn't going your way, and why didn't you just give up? And he would point to the pastor William Heckler, and he said that the pastor wouldn't let me. If you don't already, as I said, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, then start. And this passage in Psalm 122, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. It's, some folks say that in Hebrew that this context for the word pray actually means not just to inquire, but to demand. And that means that even though our faith rests in an omnipotent, all-knowing God, we know that he knows what's going on in Israel, in Jerusalem. But in the context of this prayer, we're, just like Nehemiah, when the writer came into town, he inquired, he demanded to know the state of the city of Jerusalem. And when he found out, what it was, he acted on it. He prayed like none of us ever have or ever will. And then he got up from his knees and he appealed to the king, and he was given permission to cross foreign lands and to harvest the cedar and to rebuild the city walls and the gates and reassemble and govern the people. And so we're asking you to pray like you never have or ever will, and then get up from your knees and join us and see what we can do within our respectful circle of influence. If you go to CUFI.org, you can join our rapid response team, and you'll get an action alert now and then when there's a critical piece of legislation that's pending, whether it be the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act or what we're doing right now with the Never Again Education Act to try to persuade our senators their plate's full right now, trying to figure out how to heal this country and get things back on an even keel and make sure that people are taken care of. But when that's behind us, we're going to want to revisit this with our elected officials. And so we're going to ask you to join us. Something happened a few years ago that really demonstrated not just the importance of being part of this rapid response team, but the incredible impact that it can make if you are part of it. And here's a very short video to give you an overview, and then we're going to wrap this up and let you have your day back.
American graduate student and U.S. military veteran Taylor Force.
Taylor Force was a West Point graduate who served in Afghanistan and Iraq.
He was a first-year MBA student at Vanderbilt University.
Stabbed to death by a Palestinian terrorist outside Tel Aviv.
Taylor Force was attacked during the terror spree that engulfed the ancient Mediterranean port city of Jaffa.
U.S. taxpayer money, say critics, handed over to Palestinian terrorists and rewarding their relatives.
It's called the Taylor Force Act.
Called the Taylor Force Act, would cut off U.S. aid to the Palestinian Authority if it does not stop the payments. The U.S. gives the Palestinian Authority more than $300 million a year, and the PA reportedly shells out that much to the families, about 7% of its total budget.
The U.S. House of Representatives has just passed the Taylor Force Act.
Congress passed the Taylor Force Act, named for the U.S. Army vet murdered by a Palestinian terrorist in Jaffa.
Today is to thank the leadership, the staff, and most importantly you, the members and friends of CUFI, for your early, strong, and obviously effective support of the Taylor Force Act.
That just demonstrates how when millions of people come together and they join their voice, they lock their arms and they pool their influence together, how we can make a big difference. We are right now, we're isolated. We're at home, we're cooped up. You're probably suffering from cabin fever. And this CUFI virtual resource catalog that we've made available to you, you just scratched the surface of it. And we just ask you to delve into it and to look at it as a resource that will not just keep you engaged, but when you're done and we come out of the end of this thing, you're going to be a much more effective, informed, educated, knowledgeable advocate for Israel and for the Jewish people. We just, as we close, I'm going to suggest to you, and I'm going to just close this out here so that we can actually take a look here. And I'm just going to ask you to consider, one of the things that's so important for the Jewish people when it comes to healing the world, and that is the fact that they do their very best to keep God front and center. And when it comes time for their Sabbath, they gather the people and their family around the table, and they do their very best to tune the world out and to focus on Him, and to really use that as a time to knit the family together, with the Lord being the third strand in that cord. And so I know that we're all, right now our devices are our lifeline, and we seem to be cut off. We are apart from each other, but we know that we're not alone. And I'm just going to go out on a limb. I'm just going to suggest that, that even though we do need our devices to stay in touch and connected to what's going on out in the world, let's make sure that we do kind of shut that off and put our eyes and our heart and our focus on the Lord, and also to let our kids and family know that there might be somebody in your house that is just stir crazy, and they've got one last nerve, and you seem to always be standing on it. And let's just try to take a step back, take a deep breath, and focus on the Lord, and focus on those things that we really need to take inventory for, that maybe we've taken them for granted lately. Maybe it's time that we give thanks for them. Maybe it's time that we realize that we're more blessed than we realize. And whatever our circumstances are, if you're watching this online somewhere, I can guarantee you that there are folks that wish that they could have it as you do. And so I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Be in mind that we have these resources that are going to be available to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we hope that you will find them educational. We hope that you'll find them helpful. We hope that you'll share them, and we hope that you'll consider whatever it's going to look like, that you'll consider joining us in Washington, D.C., whether it's in person or whether it's virtually in our congressional districts. Go to CUFI.org, be part of our Action Alert team, sign up to get alerts for our webinars. And again, thanks for being with us today. God bless you. Have a great day.